Hello again, everyone. Just posting another video here from this time from Ashdod in southern Israel. It's our base of operations for this little part of the project. I'm on the 7th floor here, so you get a nice view of the town and the territory. You can see the Mediterranean Sea is just behind me there. And on this side, a few miles in this direction, is the Gaza border. So we're in a different kind of part of the territory than it was from the last video, with different tensions and different kinds of contested spaces here. Even though they're actually not very far apart, it's about an hour drive in a car. So you're talking about a very small space, generally. You'll be aware of the kind of the major tensions that plague this part of the territory, probably more so than things in the West Bank. Gaza is the territory that the Israeli army and the kind of settler groupings of Israeli citizens ostensibly left back in the 2000s, and since then it's been pretty much closed off to access. It's something that we talked to quite a few people about in terms of trying to get access to do filming there, but it's very difficult. And despite the fact that Israelis want to go there, and the authorities in Gaza, which is Hamas, as you might know, they do want people to come in. They want people to see what's going on there. The Israeli government is very restrictive on who it gives a permit to access there. And obviously that's a reflection of what is a kind of a attritional state of war, or siege, as it's been described by many people in the international community, that kind of describes the situation with Gaza. Even Jimmy Carter, former president, not quite the most radical voice who ever hears, has described Gaza as an open-air prison, and that's kind of effectively what you see from being down near it. It's completely bordered off from this territory. And obviously over the last decade or so, we've had the really big flares in violence in this conflict have taken place in this particular area, so on the kind of border territories with Gaza, and within Gaza itself. You think of things like Operation Cast Lead, Pillar of Justice, and of course last year's violence on the border, with the shooting of protesters in Gaza after the redesignation of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem as a capital city, the recognition of the U.S. as Jerusalem as a capital city. So very, very tense area. On this side of the border, of course, you'll have heard a lot about the rocket attacks that emanate from Gaza, and that's a very kind of real threat that you can feel and see, as like referred to quite consistently walking around here. There are little bomb shelters everywhere. You will hear, there sirens, quite common to hear those kind of going off. The Israeli anti-rocket system, the Iron Dome, can be seen in action. So obviously, but very highly kind of almost existentially securitized environment, and next week I'm going to talk about what it might mean by something like that. One thing I noticed here that kind of made me think about something that we've been talking a lot in our module is this kind of idea of subjective visions of security, of what security means in different contexts and to different populations. And I think that there's nowhere where that is more strikingly obvious than here. My first morning here, I woke to the sound of this kind of roar coming out of the sky. And it kind of sounded like a plane, but I knew it wasn't like a commercial plane. And I came out here and I look up and there's like an F-18 fighter jet flying pretty low overhead. And I heard it a couple more times during the day as I was walking around here. And I was walking past like a little family, like a granddad and two grandkids, I think. And this jet roars past. And they don't even look up at it, right? They're not kind of unnerved by it in the way that I am. I grew up in Northern Ireland and I'm kind of like, I know what this is like. You kind of get used to the sound of like military apparatus kind of rolling around you all the time. But there's something about a fighter jet flying past at low altitude that is really, really psychologically kind of unnerving if you're not used to it. It kind of creates this massive sound and you can't really tell where it's coming from. It just kind of fills the air. And then because it's such a small object relative to the sound it produces, you kind of like scanning the sky, trying to see where it is. And then, by the time you spotted this little black dot moving insanely fast across the kind of blue background, the sound is already kind of, it's coming from it's moving in a different direction almost than the sound. It's all very, psychologically quite arresting. And obviously that noise for the population of southern Israel means something. It means security. I suppose it means there's something there to protect them. But you can imagine what that noise means if you live in Gaza, right? And it's a fairly ever-present noise. It means obviously the complete opposite of security. In many instances, it's meant death. It's meant destruction. And so you kind of must live in some kind of permanent state of fear and uncertainty about what that noise represents. And I thought that was just a very interesting illustration of some of the things that we've been kind of talking about how nothing about the nature of security can be taken as having some kind of objective meaning. Everything is determined by your perspective, and those two perspectives that I've just described are almost side by side geographically. They're separated by nothing but a fence, really. Apart from that, they are right beside each other in terms of this territory. But that fence signifies so much. And I think that is, the kind of permanent aesthetic feature of this conflict. The idea of walls and barriers through a territory that, again, as I say, is very small. You can drive across it in a few hours. Yet those barriers represent these divisions that are incomprehensibly massive. And unfortunately, I think one of the things I've taken away from this particular trip to this territory is that right now they feel quite unscalable. We have the elections coming up in a couple of weeks. It looks at the moment like Netanyahu the Quds will still be in power, and it's very, very difficult to see any kind of change to the dynamic of this conflict, while kind of more hardline perspectives govern. There's very little evidence of a dialing back of of the most kind of aggressive form of politics governing this space. Um, and yeah, so I don't, I didn't want to leave on a kind of bummer note, but that is unfortunately a bit of the impression I've got from talking to people on both sides of this divide. Um, but perhaps this is something we can talk about when I get back. Perhaps either in this terms of this conflict. Certainly, we're going to talk about it a lot when we get to discuss the Northern Ireland um, case study. Um, about to what extent you do need a moderation in political voices in order to achieve uh, some kind of peaceful uh, stability, if not some kind of emancipatory end to a conflict. Arguably, that is what was achieved in Northern Ireland. There's a peace between the more extreme ends, and with the facilitation of the most extreme ends, rather than through the capture of the moderates. But yeah, that's just something to think about on top of this idea of these subjective ideas about security. So hopefully that was useful for illustrating um, of this kind of space. I'll see you again soon.